So you're probably, hopefully, our demographic. And before we started this, and I'm going to try to summarize in 14 minutes, 3 years of work. So it might be consistent, it might be a little bit incoherent. Some of you might have seen this photo. It's New York City, I think Fifth Avenue, 130 years ago. Horses and one car. 1913, one horse, cars. So in 10 years, it changed everything in terms of mobility, how we get around cities. So in the next 10 years, they say that we're going to go through the biggest revolution and disruption in how we move around metropolitan areas. And it's going to start in the big cities, but then obviously it's going to expand into the rest of the world. So what is driving this change? It's three technologies or three sort of mindsets that are converging. One of them is electrification, so battery technology is starting to get more affordable, which pushes a lot of innovators to create electrical vehicles. Tesla came in and showed that it's possible to create a new kind of vehicle and drive it with not tech, but simply make a better car. Autonomy is another thing where we understand the metropolitan areas are on the verge of collapse, so we have to build vehicles that kind of, instead of you sitting in a truck that weighs 4 tons, pushing one person, we have to sort of get more people together in a more efficient way. And awareness around climate change. So all of this kind of the next step in mobility, which will forever change basically how we get around. So our take on this, or my personal take, is I would love not to spend most of my time sitting either in a subway or in the back of a car, just tapping on a button and waiting for a vehicle to come pick me up and then, waiting my way to work. My commute to work is this guy, which is kind of a newer version of a horse. It's a 2008 Scrambler, and I ride in the city practically every day. And it's by far the most economical, the cheapest way, the fastest way to get around the city. But it's not the primary reason why I ride a bike. The main reason is basically the sensation is if I were to ride a wave to work. That's, I think, the sort of easiest way to explain it. It's the kind of the sense of freedom and the sense of empowerment you get when you ride this thing. And during 15 minutes, 10 minutes, you're in this sort of meditative state. And somebody said riding a bike is kind of like getting a superpower, yet realizing that you're human, because you still travel at fast speeds, you're exposed, you're in the middle of traffic. But if I were to go into micromobility and find a way, what is the transportation of the future? A hybrid between that would be my choice, which is kind of was the inception behind Tarform. So as my kind of day primary career is build digital products. My background is in tech, industrial design, product design. And 10 years ago, I wanted to kind of get away from the screen and start building physical things. So I started building vintage bikes and just buying old British bikes from the 60s, 70s upstate and kind of tearing them down, putting them back together into machines that look like this. A few years ago, I was working on a bike and, it's dripping oil and I'm looking at this thing, which I love, but at the same time thinking, this kind of oil and fire thing has been moving us around for the last 100 years. Maybe there's another way to kind of combine technology and have it run by clean energy. So I started thinking, okay, Tesla came in and showed that here is a new interpretation of a car. Maybe I could do something when it comes to motorcycles. So it kind of evolved, and besides building a bike that's powered by electrical, I was thinking, if we were going to create a company that makes physical products, can we do it in another way? Can we build it with design being sort of one of the main drivers? Because that's how I believe you create change, not by telling people, oh, you should be green, you should be sustainable, but simply build a product that people want. The second part would be sustainability. So how can we move away from toxic materials and try to use as many ecological and natural materials as possible? And the third is basically use technology that does not make things autonomous, but on the contrary empowers you. So you get to feel the sense of how is it to ride a surfboard, and how can I make that experience sort of safer? So a short story how we went from sketch to the vehicles that we launched recently. Started with fabricating the frame. So initially it was just getting down to design philosophy. So if I'm going to design an electrical motorcycle, should it look like an old school motorcycle? Should it look like something from Blade Runner or Tron? So my personal philosophy is trying to make it as simple as possible. I grew up in Sweden, where sort of Scandinavian design is kind of very simple, very pure. So remove everything that's non-essential. At the same time, we want to kind of preserve an element of craftsmanship. So instead of having everything automated and just made by a machine, how can we still use human hands, yet use modern and advanced manufacturing? During the prototyping stage, we tried a bunch of different materials, such as 3D printing out of bioplastics, materials made out of hemp, cornstarch. And during also that process, kind of got a lot of insights on why aren't the other companies trying to use sustainable materials? And the alternatives aren't there. And there are tons of companies that are kind of working on how do we move away from toxic materials in the automotive industry. And then it turns out that the biggest sort of impact of a product is happening during its creation, not its use. So usually, this is a kind of ballpark, 80% of energy waste and energy is required to build something comes from its creation and not use. So that's a huge thing to kind of keep in mind if we're building physical products, that not try to make an eco product, but also rethink the way we're making them. As an example, to make a computer chip that's 2 gram requires 1.3 kilo of fossil fuels, which is 650 times amount of resources. So how can we sort of start rethinking of the way we're building products? Internal combustion engine contains over 1,000 parts. A lot of them are moving. I'm sure many of you own a vehicle and have taken it for maintenance, how much it costs to replace that. Electrical motor is one moving part. So in terms of using electrical vehicles, it's going to change completely sort of the service and the maintenance industry as well. A big part was to integrate technology. So how can we sort of create a connected experience between the bike and your mobile device, because we all live with these retina displays. So UI was a big focus, and kind of make it a similar experience to what you already have in your iPhone. We tried a lot of 3D metal printing, partnered up with a company called EOS, and try to explore what other ways to manufacture and prototype is there. The logotypes are printed in brass. The motor is made out of biodegradable cornstarch plastic. And a lot of parts were CNC machined. Most of them are aluminum, because aluminum is 100% recyclable. Starting putting it together, basically, as you can see, the internals are quite different than a traditional internal combustion engine, just miles and miles of wiring. Starting putting together the first 2 concept prototypes that would be fully rideable. Here's a end of the headlight that's 3D printed. Exterior panels also 3D printed. We use some flaxseed fiber, which is a biodegradable alternative to carbon fiber. Now this stuff is, you can just throw it on compost, and in a couple of years it'll biodegrade. And it took us about 2 years to build the first 2 vehicles, and we launched them at New Lab in October last year. And it was obviously a big moment, because we never showed the design to anyone, so it was kind of a little stealth project. And the rest was kind of seeing what do people think about this. So the idea is to build a bike on one platform, instead of a lot of traditional manufacturers. They build 5 or 7 different bikes. How can we build one machine and then just change the exterior to make it customizable to however you like it? Hence also eliminating a lot of waste. As you can see, the design language is kind of a hybrid between retro / futuristic. And the idea is to make something that's recognizable. So you see it, it reminds you of a motorcycle, but clearly it's not an internal combustion engine. Obviously, technology and connected with your mobile device is a big part of it. And then we went out for test riding, driving around Navy Yard, which is our kind of closed circuit. And just a couple of months after launch, we got invited to be part of world's first exhibit called the Electric Revolution at the Peterson Museum in Los Angeles, which is obviously a huge honor after just a few months, where they handpicked 20 of sort of most interesting vehicles, electrical vehicles from the past and the future, where we were honored to be a part of. So where do we stand now? We have a lot of demand for these bikes, so we're working in full mode to go into manufacturing and trying to figure out what is our roadmap in terms of production. We want to try to build these bikes locally, as close to New York as possible. Again, we want to try to be as sustainable as possible. There's a lot of challenges to build a vehicle that should be durable, long-lasting, but at the same time use ecological materials. But the biggest factor is still creating something that people want. And I believe that if you build something that's desirable, that drives technology, that drives behavior, and basically drives evolution. So in marketing and branding and storytelling, we spend a lot of time trying to understand why we buy things, but we don't spend a lot of time understanding or trying to figure out why we keep things. And as a designer, I spend most of my time figuring out, okay, how do I make a product that is not being discarded in a year or 2 years? How do you design something that you keep? So what makes these objects just stand out? This is a Ferrari Dino from 1970s, which is considered one of the most beautiful cars ever made. And you can't really apply science to why people consider that, but everyone kind of feels something. You look at it and you understand, yeah, this is a beautiful car. I did not have posters of a Toyota Camry when I was growing up. What makes this particular object something that ends up in a museum versus a teapot you buy in IKEA? Some things we simply don't own. We have them for a minute, we buy them, and we discard them. One of the stories could be what went into not just the creation of the product, but also the product's journey. So Thomas Burberry founded Burberry in 1850, I believe, and he started making weatherproof coats for the army during World War I. And only officers of higher rank were able to wear the trench coat, and that made Burberry one of the hottest brands out there because of that story that went into that. This is a chair that is also considered one of the design classics, designed by Hans Wagner, and it was used during the presidential debate between Kennedy and Nixon. And Kennedy sat down in the chair and said, "Wow, this is really comfortable." And that little line basically made that chair into a design icon. Why? Probably because Hans Wagner spent decades trying to perfect every curve, trying to implement craftsmanship into making that chair that seemingly looks just like a chair, right? But made a person sit down and just think, wow, this is a comfortable chair. Probably most of you are not thinking, wow, I'm sitting in a really comfortable chair. Do you know what this is? Some of you shake hands. It's a juice press by Philip Stark. In my mind, one of the most beautiful objects that kind of incorporate art and functionality. Also, most juice presses don't end up in MoMA. 70% of Land Rovers are still on the road today. Why? It's not the best car ever made, and it's really uncomfortable, but it became an icon. Their ad says, You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. And I think that's a good philosophy to kind of bring into the creation of products is how do we build a product that not just lasts a couple of months, a year, but how do we build products that last? And in my mind, that's the most sustainable thing you can build, something that you simply don't throw away. So right now we're preparing again for manufacturing, and we're going to try to implement as many of these principles as possible as we scale. It's going to be a journey, but I encourage everyone who is building physical products is to maybe think a little bit extra as what are the materials I'm using producing these things? And do I spend a lot of time and sort of attention figuring out, does this, you know, where is this thing going to end up? Yeah, thank you. Q&A.
Yes, it's going to be me. Hi, I'm Matt.
How you doing, man?
That thing looks incredible.
Thank you.
It's amazing. So how's the manufacturing going to work? Are you going to manufacture locally in the US for the first 50, or are you going to go to China?
Yeah, we're going to do final assembly in Brooklyn, in Navy Yard, right next to New Lab. And then the parts are going to be manufactured all over the world. So we're going to have, most likely, have the frames welded upstate in New York. Some parts we're going to, mainly exterior parts, we want to try to manufacture it locally, at least for the first 50 units. The powertrain are going to come from Asia because it's mainly electronics. And then obviously it depends once we go into a couple of hundred units and thousands, and then the logistics are completely different.
Is there any target price for this?
So the first 50 units, as you can imagine, they're handmade.
Yeah.
This is sort of the halo product, similar to what Tesla did with the Roadster model, to kind of position the brand as, oh, what the hell is that? These bikes are going to start at 30,000, customizable up to 70. And then in a couple of years, similar again to Tesla, we want to launch a product that's more affordable and maybe start between 18 to 25.
Okay. And what's the discount code for the group?
The discount, you can combine test ride.
Hardwired 75% off?
Yeah, yeah.
All right, do we have questions?
Okay, sorry, can you hear me? Yeah. So was there any thought to innovation in bikes, safety for both the rider and the bike? Was that, I mean, that's the biggest, I mean, it's obviously very premium and
yeah. Yeah, I had to trim down the fat of all the features that went into it, but tech is for sure a huge thing. So the automotive industry has been using proximity sensors, blind spot detection for years. That, for some reason, has not been sort of translated into electrical or motorcycles in general, and that's a big thing. So how can we make the bike sort of be more aware of its surrounding? And the basics are, you're riding on the bike, it knows that there's a car behind me. You know, how can we use machine learning to sort of predict if the car in front of me is going to hit brakes, and do I have enough distance in front of me? And that's going to be very interesting to kind of experiment, and something that kind of gives you, again, the sense that you're still riding the bike and not let you rely fully on technology, because you still want to be hyper aware where you're going.
Hey, the electrical part, is it rechargeable lithium ion, or is it just like an automobile battery, or?
Yeah, it's a lithium ion battery. It's going to be 11 kilowatt hours, which is going to give you about 150 miles in the city. Totally depends how you use an electrical vehicle. And rechargeable up to 80% in about an hour. So this is primarily designed to be used in a city. This bike is not meant to go across country yet, because simply battery technology is not there yet. But it will surely improve in the next couple of years.
Any plans for self-driving type technology?
No, never.
Sorry, another safety question. So the noise a bike makes is obviously a big safety feature. Do you turn up the volume on this, or how do you handle that?
Yeah, you can. And we actually worked with a composer from Sweden that designed a specific sound for the bike. You can go to our website and play the trailer to hear how it sounds. It's kind of a Blade Runner type of thing. And the idea is mainly because it gives you a sort of level of sensor experience. Like you want to sit on this machine and feel that it's on. With electrical vehicles, you don't know that they're on. And the second part is simply riding around in the city. I want other people to hear me, but I don't want it to sound like a Harley with, two pipes coming out of the back.
We got one last quick one back here, over here on the right.
A great presentation, great product. On the 3D manufacturing, how many printers are you using? Is it one or several?
I think we tried basically every additive manufacturing technology out there, everything from SLA, SLS, FDM. But two of the main companies we work with is Formlabs and EOS. And it's also a challenge to try to figure out, can we bring this into production? And for low volume manufacturing, 3D printing works great. For higher volumes, we're not really there yet. But there are a ton of companies like HP with their fusion jet technology entering and saying, yes, we can make a couple of 100,000 units that are 3D printed. So super, super exciting times.
All right, it's a wrap for this talk. This is stunning. I'm very excited to see it in the streets of Manhattan.
Yeah, you see it on the streets soon.